right, well, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners, the Turrbal and Yagara people of the lands of which we're meeting today, and acknowledge and pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. You have heard so much this weekend about culture and strategy, have you not? Have you not? Yes, this is a kind of interactive exercise, okay? Yes, I definitely hope that you've been hearing some of the key themes, which are culture and strategy. And I'm sure that you're all going home with lots of ideas about what you should be doing or what you could be doing or what you might be doing. But today I just want to spend a few minutes thinking about how that's actually going to turn into action. Because whether it's revolution or evolution, at some point action has to be taken. And I'm cheering on Darren because he said a lot of great things about, turning ideas and not just listening, but turning it into action. So today I want to spend a few minutes with you, maybe giving you some ideas about how you can use these ideas that you've heard this weekend and really take them back and do something with them. Now, unlike Darren, who said that he wasn't going to make you do any exercise, I am. So we're going to start off with a couple of little activities because you've been sitting down a while. So what I'd like you to do first of all is all stand up. Just stand up. Including you, Yvonne. Come on. All been sitting down way too long. All right, so what I'm going to ask you to do when I say go is you have to find a partner, someone close to you, and if you're away from someone, you're going to have to find a partner. And in 20 seconds each, so 20 seconds each, you've got to tell your partner that if you were being sent to a desert island for 12 months and were only allowed to take 3 things, what would you take? Okay, go. 20 seconds each. Go to your partner. Stay standing, just for a couple seconds more. All right, fantastic. I hope that you were all able to very quickly tell them the 3 things that you would take. Now, the second activity is to turn to your neighbour again and tell them what are the top 1 to 3 skills that your staff, all staff, no matter what their job is, no matter what they do in your organisation, what are the things that everybody needs to make them high performing? Turn to your neighbour again, just a quick conversation. 1 to 3 things. Excellent. All right, you can have a seat. Well done. You got the blood moving. So please use Pigeonhole to put in some of those things. I would really like to hear from you. What were those 1 to 3 skills that you felt everybody in your organisation needed to be high performing? Now, could you also... In the question box, yes, that's where you can just add some comments in there in the question box. So just please raise your hand if you were able to identify those 1 to 3 things. Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Do you think that all of your board and your leadership team would agree with that? Because that's the key here. The key is that not just you have some good ideas, just like as if you were going to a desert island and had some really good ideas, because some of you are very analytical, some of you are very creative, okay, and you probably came up with different ideas about what you would take to a desert island, all right? Just as similar, you need to make sure that everybody within your leadership team, including your board, understand what the 1 to 3 key things are that is going to create high performance throughout your team. And I want to suggest today that strategic thinking should be one of them. Because the reality is that every day, every even microsecond, people are having to address issues, problems, situations, and they're having to make micro decisions that are shaping not only the culture, but the organisation and the success and the performance of the organisation. So it is critically important, and the reason why we know this is because we've done lots of research on high performance teams. Now, you can just write down what you consider a high performance team. Here's just some examples of what you might consider to be high performing teams. And the reality is that these teams all have very good technical skills. They know their specific jobs really, really well. And right here, you know, people know exactly what they're meant to be doing at any given second. They have trained in the technical side of what they're doing. But guess what the common thing is that they all do, despite what it is, what team they're on, what they're doing at any given time. They're all really good at critically analysing a problem or a situation and making decisions very quickly and very swiftly in a strategic manner. Because most high-performing teams like these, it's a life or death situation if they don't make the right decision. Now, some of your staff are in the life and death situations, you know, they're nurses or doctors or, you know, they are in health, something like that. Many of you are not, though, and you might say, well, my team aren't making life and death decisions. But the reality is that the micro decisions that they're making every day does add up to whether you achieve your goals or whether you don't achieve your goals. So all of your staff need to have some critical analysis skills. And you might have said to me, why did you do that silly little exercise around going to a desert island? Well, one of the reasons why I got you to spend just a few minutes doing that is because I was practicing your critical analysis skills. I was asking you to do it very quickly, think strategically, very quickly. How would I do that? What would my response be? And this is what high-performing teams do all the time. They practice, practice, practice. They don't just go out onto the field or up in the air and hope that they're going to get it right and hope that they have the analysis and strategic skills. They sometimes spend hours and hours and hours, sometimes weeks, sometimes months practicing before they actually go out and actually have to test their skills. Now, you might say, well, I don't have time to, you know, spend our staff on lots of training, and we don't, you know, we've got to work, we've got to do it. And yeah, a lot of people say to me, it's like building the plane while you're flying it, you know, you actually have to do the job. And that's where my argument comes in then, is that strategic thinking and strategic critical analysis skills should be part of what you're doing all the time. You don't have to go off and do a big training course. You can, of course, and by the way, we do very affordable governance skills training. Just slip that in. But the thing is that you can do this as part of your job. You can do this as part of your board meeting. Your staff can do it as part of their job when they're thinking about the problems that are rising every day. So here is my argument then, is about how we can get all of your staff high performing all the time. So I just want to give you some tips about how we might do that. By the way, I'm going to throw up some references here. If you email me, I'll send you all the references. So if you're interested in looking at some of where this theory and references comes from. Now, Botlos and Satlow say something very interesting. They say that you must model not just your thinking, your cognitive ability to think through problems, but very importantly, your emotional responses to problems. This is where a lot of the dynamics of how people communicate and how they respond to different points of view, how they debate different options, how they look at situations. There's a whole lot of emotional responses that we have. And it's very important that you look at that and have emotional intelligence. I'm sure you've heard that before. But also then, and how that relates into behaviour. And critically and analysing all the time yourself personally, how am I responding to that? Do I feel defensive? Am I acting in the best interests of the organisation? Am I making decisions based on different points of view? You know, so you've got to really think through not only your cognitive but your emotional responses. And then what does that actually happen in terms of behaviour? So they say it's very important for you to model that. And the reason is because culture always starts from what happens in the boardroom and the leadership team. So you need to be constantly reflective on how you are thinking through complex problems. And I don't need to tell you that's because there's a lot of change going on around here, right? All of you. If there's not, then there's a problem. We must be constantly changing, but we must be aware of how to lead change and how to do that positively. So we really have to think about those three different things and how we're doing it. Now, these researchers did some research into looking at bankruptcy, and they researched 750 bankruptcies during a 25-year period. And they showed that the number one factor on all of those bankruptcy was bad strategy. Now, you might say, well, of course, if they make bad strategy, they're going to fail. But the reality is, how do we know what is good, bad, or good, bad strategy? Because at any given time, you hope and think, hopefully, that you're making the best strategy. I want you to have a quick look at that photo there. Now, when that concrete pavement was made, who thinks that was a bad strategy? Put up your hand if you think it was a bad strategy. Well, look at the time. They probably thought it was a wonderful strategy because that was in their design. They thought, let's make it go here. We'll make people go around. But the reality is, it wasn't until they've actually done that that they've seen that actually that probably wasn't the best strategy because that wasn't what the people wanted. We're humans. We want the shortcut. It's only till afterwards that you realise it's a bad strategy. So maybe the lesson here is that you are constantly making strategy, whether you like it or not, you're making decisions, and you hope and think that it's the best strategy. But unless you're monitoring it and strategically analysing it and critiquing it all the time, it could be wrong. It could be not the right strategy. And you've got to be open and honest with yourself and your board and your leadership team about that. And what I'm suggesting also is that you're teaching your staff to do the same, to constantly analyse and critique what the strategy is. So what is strategy then? Well, strategy isn't just an annual strategic plan. It isn't just big goals. It's actually a lot of these, as I said before, micro decisions that you're making, sometimes in a very short amount of time. So you have to have really good strategic thinking. Then you have to plan and say, well, what does that look like? If I've learnt this piece of information, what does it mean over here? What does this mean about how we're doing things? You've got to put that all together in some sort of a plan. And of course, then you have to take some action. It's not just looking at information, it's actually using that information to make decisions. That's what strategy is. So when you look back at those companies that went bankrupt, it was probably much more than just a bad couple of goals. It was a lot more complex than that. Those organisations that went bankrupt were not doing good strategic thinking, not good strategic planning, and they weren't making good strategic decisions. So those are the things that you've got to think about. Your strategy is just an accumulation of these skills. And that's what we've got to make sure that we're looking at. Okay. So, you've got lots of ideas from this weekend, this conference, and I'm sure that you're all going to go back, and bar maybe a couple of you that brought your whole of your board or the whole of your leadership team to this conference, many of you have been tasked with going back and sharing what you've learnt from the conference and what you think you should be going back and doing now. And guess what's going to happen, folks? Shout it out. What do you think is going to happen? You're going to get a little bit of resistance, aren't you? All right? Because most of your board or most of your leadership team are actually not here. They're not getting enthused and excited and hearing all the speakers, and they're not you. So you're going to go back and you're going to say, well, we heard this and we heard that, and I've got these ideas and I think this is, and they're all going to go, really? And guess what the first thing they're going to say? The first thing is they're going to say, we don't have time. We don't have time to do all of your ideas that you've come back with. We don't have time to go off and do training and do this and do that and do strategy work. And, they're definitely going to be some resistance around time. So I'm just warning you all right now, okay? All right, I'm just giving you a heads up. That's the main key thing. And you're going to go back enthusiastic. And then when they say, okay, they might even say that's a great idea, but We'll get to that. That can be in 6 months' time. You're going to get frustrated. The other things that they're going to say. This is some research that Howarth did with about 500 managers across numerous companies. And he was looking at what were the challenges to implementing strategy within the organisation. So here's what he came up with in terms of what they were saying. So time, commitment, lack of priorities. They didn't like moving the status quo. Not understanding what strategy is. Lack of training and tools to thinking strategically. Lack of alignment. Firefighting, lack of quality, timely data and information, and unclear business direction. So I can guarantee you probably that at least one or two of these are going to be some of your resistance when you go back to the board or your leadership team and say, look, we could get better if we do this strategy and culture stuff. So these are all things that you need to address with your team. But today, I've only got a few minutes left, so I just wanted to pick up one. And this is the one that I think, for me, I hear a lot of people saying, well, we know we have to do strategy, but we just don't know how. Like, what are the tools? What are the actual things that we need to know? So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes and give you some ideas, and you can go away and research all of this and, try and understand it, but you really need to go back to your board and your leadership team with some concrete ideas about how you're actually going to do this. So there's 4 things here that, if you take away from today, is how to develop strategic thinking throughout the culture. Number 1, you have to gain insight. So I'd really encourage you to write down now, how might we gain insight? Insight into our current strategy, but also potential future strategy. Where do you think you get insight from? Now, here's where I'd like you to just pose in pigeonhole. What do you do now to actually gain insight? Where is it that you go? What do you read? Who do you listen to? Where do you research? What kind of things do you do? Okay? So just write that down. How might we gain insight so that we can start to be more strategic and have more critical analysis skills on our strategy? The second is that we know that good strategic thinkers use empathy. They actually try to look at the design of their services or their business models or their funding strategy or their fundraising strategies, whatever it is, and they use empathy to understand the customer experience or the stakeholder experience. So I'm going to give you a tool in a moment, how you might do that. But I really want you to write down, how do we gain empathy? As boards and leaders, you need also empathy with your staff. So how do you gain empathy for the staff when you're making decisions about strategy and say, could you roll this out? Could you do this? Could you achieve that? Here's some more KPIs. Do you ever consider how your staff are going to feel, think, and behave in regard to that directive? So that's the second one. The third one is look for opportunity. So very much like people have said today, is that we're not just always looking in the rear-view mirror, we actually have to look forward. We have to be future-proofing, future-thinking about what we're doing and the strategy that we're making. So I want you to write down now, how might we look for opportunities? And where are you looking for those opportunities? Try and not be too siloed within your own, even in your own part of the sector. Look at different types of opportunities and different there was great speakers about, different stakeholders and different funders and different investors and different research partners, etc. So have a look at lots of different opportunities that might arise for you or that you could pursue as a possible strategic opportunity. And the last one is foster creativity. So I'd like you to write down, how might we foster creativity within our staff and our board? Now, that's a tough one, because some people say, I'm not creative. That's not really, I'll just leave that to the visionary people, the people who have ideas. And, the thing is, though, that you still need to be creative when you're addressing problems or challenges. you cannot be too blinkered, because that's going to get you into a lot of trouble. You have to try and be really creative. So what I did was a little exercise with you at the beginning of this session was just have a bit of fun, but it was also to get you thinking a little bit creatively. It took us, 1.5 minutes, not long, but it was enough to just get your creative thinking minds on. And you can do that at the beginning of your meetings. You can do that with your staff. You can put creative options out to your staff and say, hey, we're facing a problem here or a strategic challenge here. Who's got some creative ideas? Most of them might not go anywhere, but you never know what happens when people give you ideas. So how often do you throw out that challenge for people to come up with creative ways around solutions and ideas? Many of you have seen Dobie out there, my little robot. Did you come and see him? All right, I was trying to bring him along this weekend just to show you that sometimes robotics and AI, we're using virtual reality, we're looking a lot at technology and what kind of opportunities that might offer organisations. And sometimes we don't know. We're just sort of using empathy to look at, what you need, what your customer needs. It's really exciting to just think about, how might we use the opportunity of technology to improve or enhance the performance of your team. In fact, I've got another little slide on that in a moment. So very, very quickly then, I'm going to go through a couple of ideas for you. So becoming a strategically mindful nonprofit. This was research that was done on a case study, and they found the 2 key drivers of being strategic throughout your organisation was a preoccupation with failure. That means you've got to look at all your failure. Eek, all right? We don't normally want to do that because we want to, look at all our successes. But the reality is that when you have a look at things that are not going so well and you critique them and you learn from them, you become a learning organisation. And for this organisation that they did the case study on, they were able to be sustainable through much change because of that. And the other thing that they did was they had a reluctance to simplify. Now, Stephen Bowman said this really well yesterday and said, what are the strategic implications of those simplified numbers that you get out of a board report? Or those simplified, we try and get all our reports down as many as we can because we don't want to overload people with lots of writing that goes over their heads. I agree with that. But the reality is that when we try to simplify things sometimes for people, we miss a lot too. And so we really have to, you as board members and leaders, when staff tell you things or when you're reading a report, you have to really go, well, what does this mean? How do I make sure that this isn't becoming too simplified and that I'm not missing things because of it? And we have to instigate that throughout the culture. Reflective practice is another tool that you can use. Write it down. Go and do a lot of research around how reflective practice can be used throughout your organisation. But it's one of my really big tools that I use all the time. And the reality is that because many of you, say, oh yes, I do a journal, or I go home at night and, do a journal, or I meet with a supervisor and I do some reflection with them. Well, that's all good. But the reality is that as an organisation, you should be doing it in teams. You should be doing it on your board. You should be doing it with your executive. You should actually be doing it throughout the organisation in a group reflection somehow, because that is very powerful and actually has an effect on the whole organisation. So don't become too siloed with your reflective practice. This one I was talking about, the empathy mapping. So we use a lot of human-centered design. If you haven't heard that, write it down, go away, research what human-centered design or design thinking is. This is the way that many, many organisations now are using to help them be socially innovative. And it starts with empathy. And we really have to understand and use a tool such as empathy mapping to understand the customer, understand our staff, understand our donors, understand our funders. We really have to start using tools like this so that we can critique what it is that we're doing well, but what we could do better. So I highly recommend this for everybody throughout your organisation, but you as a board can start using it as well. So some colleagues in America doing some research around planning and the importance of good strategic planning, and they say 4 things. Look at the world around you. Stop being so siloed and just only looking within the organisation. You have got to start looking outside. Coming to conferences like this is a great start. This is exactly where you should be this weekend, because you're looking outside, you're hearing different speakers, you're talking to different people, exactly the right thing. But it's not just you that's got to be doing that. You've got to be encouraging everyone within your organisation to do that. Joining up with newsletters, associations, getting on lists, joining communities of practice. You know, you've got to encourage this to happen across your organisation. From there, you can determine what's important. So what does this all mean for us? Does this implicate us at all? Be curious and ask questions. Get really, really good in the boardroom at asking questions. And be creative and open to new ideas. Okay, quickly get a pen out. I'm going to ask you to be creative right now. Get a pen and piece of paper. Come on. Because you're going to get resistance when you get home. So I'm sure you're all going, why am I going to do this? You're going to make me do something else. All right, I want you to turn to your neighbour. You're going to have to just join together. Turn to the neighbour that you were with and just draw them. Portrait. Quick, quick. Got 10 seconds. Portrait. Just draw your neighbour. Go. Hold your portrait up. That's cheating. Hold your portrait up. Yvonne, can you see any good ones you might want to... All right, now I want you to put it on social media. No, that's all right. That's all right, that's okay. Okay, so what was your resistance? What was the reason? Were you resistant to that? Yes, why were you resistant? Yeah, you go, oh, I can't do that. I'm not an artist. All right, so very immediately our emotional and our cognitive feelings kick in, because we have so many barriers to being creative. And so we think we can't do it. The reality is, does it matter? Did it matter that you weren't an artist? No. That you're not a great drawer? No, it didn't matter at all. Who cares? We all had a laugh, didn't we? Have a look at the person's drawing of you. All right? The reality is that all we did, we started to get some endorphins going, we started to be creative, and we can do that. So I'm going to finish up, but I want you to start thinking creatively within your organisation and doing exercises like this that go, you know what, it doesn't matter. We can just have fun being creative, planning for disruption, thinking creatively, practicing. All right, this was really what Rawlinson said. He said those self-imposed barriers that stop us from being creative. Conformity, not challenging the obvious, evaluating too quickly, fear of looking like a fool. Who didn't want to do that because they feared they were going to look like a fool? Yeah, it's just common. And that's what stops us and our teams from being creative. So you've got to go back and say to your staff and your leadership team and say, we don't care what you look like or what the ideas are that come forward. We just want to start getting creative around here. Okay. So I want to leave you with 2 key principles. Number 1, if you're going to unlock this strategic thinking and planning that's so important and push it through all your organisation, number 1, you need to purposefully prioritise reflective practice, creative thinking and planning for change. And number 2, you need to find the tools that help you and enable you to confidently see complex challenges as opportunities. And don't be afraid of looking like a fool or looking like you don't know what's going on. Ask good questions. And if you ask the questions from the right people, namely your staff is a good place to start, but around you and outside of your organisation, you're going to be able to come up with some great answers and create that high-performing team that you need. Thank you.